Welcome, viewers, to the 19th episode of Beyond Phrenology. And today we are delighted to have with us Professor Emeritus Dorothy Fragaszy. Dorothy Fragaszy also tends to be my PhD advisor at University of Georgia. She's a comparative psychologist by training and had a very prolific career in comparative psychology and animal behavior. She started with a PhD at University of California, Davis, followed by a stint at Bucknell. Thereafter, she took up faculty positions at the California State University, followed by another faculty position at Washington State. And then she was a professor at University of Georgia. And I think she was there for more than 3 decades. And that's when I joined. Right?
29 years.
29 years, almost 3 decades, yeah. With her lab on the 6th floor of the psychology building. And she had a group of Capuchin monkeys to work with, as well as she did a lot of work on human infants, comparison of behavior in Capuchin monkeys and infants. And thereafter, she launched she basically developed from scratch the EthoCebus project in Brazil. And that's when I started working with her during my PhD. So welcome, Doree, to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. And let me correct one thing right away. I did not by myself start the EthoCebus project. It was from the beginning, it was a team effort. So my co-directors were Patricia Itzar and Elisabetta Wieselbergi. Okay, so otherwise, for that nice introduction.
And we will come back to how the project was started at a later part during this conversation. So you started working with the monkeys and then to infants. So would you like to elaborate a little what motivated you to start working on monkeys? It was a different career choice.
Yes, nobody in my family could understand why I was going to do this and follow this career path. It was not something that was preordained in any way. So when I was an undergraduate, I took a class in comparative psychology, and it was by far my favorite class. First, let me preface this by saying I grew up on a farm all around animals, and I was always responsible for caring for lots of different species of domesticated livestock species, sheep and horses and other animals. So when I got to college and I could take a class in comparative psychology, that was really very interesting to me. And at the same time, I was able to serve as a research assistant in another professor's lab, not my comparative psychology professor's lab, but another person's lab in the zoology department, actually Peter Klopfer. He's a well-known name in animal behavior. And he was studying lemurs. And Duke University, I was an undergrad at Duke. Duke University had then and still has this unique facility with lemurs from Madagascar. And Peter Klopfer was doing a project on maternal care of infants in lemurs. And I was an observer, volunteer, undergraduate research assistant observer for him for that project. So I spent a lot of time watching lemurs, and I found out that it was possible to pursue animal behavior as a career, to watch animals and get paid for it. And this sounded really wonderful to me. I had no idea that this was a possibility, and I had not settled on any particular career path. So discovering that I could study animals and do scientific research and have a living doing that, that was terrific. So I decided to do that. So that's how I wound up at Davis. And when I was studying the lemurs and writing a research paper for my comparative psychology class, the topic I chose was on maternal bonding to infants, because in my youth, when I was caring for sheep, one of the problems that comes up sometimes with some breeds of sheep, especially if they have twins, is that the ewe will accept one lamb but not the other. Or sometimes she'll reject both, or sometimes even a singleton she would reject. So we had the problem as caretakers for these sheep of sorting out mothers and infants that would get along. And occasionally we would have to work hard to get an infant adopted by another mother. It's no easy task, I can tell you that. And we didn't always succeed. And then we had a bottle lamb. So that was all right, but it was a lot of work. So I was interested in this mother-infant bond, and I did my research paper on that as an undergraduate. And I discovered that all the literature was about monkeys. This was in 1968 and 9. There was no, there was almost no literature about mother-infant relations in any other species. So I figured I have to go study monkeys. So I applied for graduate programs in primatology, and I wound up at UC Davis, and that's what I did. And
you are related in your academic ancestry to the so-called person who started the whole work on mother-infant interactions, right? Harry Harlow.
Well, yes. In fact, he started that with my advisor, Bill Mason. And, it could be that Bill Mason was actually the person who proposed the surrogates for the monkeys so that they would have something to cling to, and started that line of research. He was Harry Harlow's postdoc, and he was working in the lab at the time that project started. Harlow initially started not interested in development per se, but in learning processes. And I think it was Bill's interests that sort of directed him in that way. But in any case, yes, I worked with Bill Mason, and he was, at the time that I arrived at UC Davis, he was engaged in an interesting project, rearing infant macaques, some with dogs as surrogates, just dogs from the pound, and some monkeys with hobby horses as surrogates. So these were inanimate, approximately the same size and same shape objects. So he had a dog and monkey rearing project going on, but I wasn't part of that. When I arrived, Bill Mason had previously done a short field project on titi monkeys, EthoCebus monkeys. They have a different genus name now. They're EthoCebus or something like that. The taxonomy has changed, but the monkeys are the same. And so he did a field project in Colombia studying titi monkeys that are monogamous. They're unusual among monkeys in that they are monogamous. They duet. The male principally cares for the offspring. So they're an unusual kind of non-human primate. So he had a colony of titi monkeys, the only colony in the States, because these monkeys are hard to keep. They're rather fragile. And he had successfully created a colony of titi monkeys. And he had to compare to them squirrel monkeys, which are much better known. And group living, completely different behavioral ecology, but they overlap in where they live. And sometimes squirrel monkeys will in fact live with titi monkeys. So they are compatible in their diet and in where they live and so on, but they have completely different lifestyles. So he said, these monkeys are here. They're not occupied. Nobody's doing work with them right now. He didn't have a grant-funded project to work with them. They were just being maintained by the Primate Center, the UC Davis California Regional Primate Center at Davis. Yeah. So I began to work with the squirrel and titi monkeys. And so I had free rein to do whatever was ethically appropriate and within the resources of the lab that I worked in. But one downside was that these monkeys were not reproducing. So my plans to study mother-infant behavior had to be put aside for a little while. I couldn't really study behavioral development because there were no baby titi monkeys, or very few, and few squirrel monkeys. So I began to study lots of other things about them. And since I had never seen a living monkey at all until I arrived at UC Davis, completely novice about anything to do with primatology, except what I had read for one undergraduate term paper.
Right.
I just started from scratch, really from scratch. And Bill said, go watch them, just go observe them, go learn about them. And that was perfect. I mean, that's what I love to do. So I just spent a lot of time watching these monkeys, watching them eat, watching them just move around in their cages, watching them. And the studies I did in my first year and actually throughout my graduate tenure were really very simple. And they were mainly, their aim was descriptive. I wasn't testing hypotheses. I didn't have a specific theory. I had a theme, but I didn't have a theory. And the theme was that these monkeys that are approximately the same size, approximately ecologically equivalent in where they live and what they eat, they're not perfectly, but rather similar, they approached life completely differently. So the socioecology of it was just really fascinating. So I spent a lot of time doing study. I did a study where they investigated novel objects that I made little things out of what Bill told me the technical term was junk objects. So I made little gadgets and things just to put in the cage, just for them to come and look at and do whatever they were going to do with them. And I watched them eating, and I did a study that had to do with giving them different sizes of foods and foods of different textures. And I did studies where I presented them the same food in an experimental setting, where I presented them with the same food repeatedly, just a little piece of this, a little piece of this, a little piece of this, again and again and again, to see what they would do. And the results were fascinating. Do you want to know what happened?
Of course. Yeah.
Well, what happened is the squirrel monkeys would eat this thing once or twice, and then they would take it and throw it, or they would just not even take it. They weren't interested in eating the same thing more than 2 or 3 or 4 times. The titi monkeys, give them the same little piece of something, a little piece of raisin, a little piece of whatever it was, and they would eat it, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And they would get to the point where they were actually full, but they would still take one and they would hold it up like they were feeling guilty that they could not eat that one too. They were so persistent. They never dropped it. They just would hold it. So this, in fact, if you think about their behavioral ecology, makes some sense, because the squirrel monkeys are opportunistic foragers. They range over a wide space. They're visual foragers. They're looking for the thing they're going to hit next. They travel a lot. They're full of energy. Titi monkeys are quite sedentary. They have a very small territory, which they know very well. They use all the resources in that territory very carefully. So they're very conservative in their approach towards travel, towards feeding, towards moving in space at all, towards investigating objects. Very different. So, I mean, it was a great setup for a graduate student, because no matter what study I did, they differed in perfectly interesting ways. It was great. It was so much fun. So anyway, I spent years watching squirrel monkeys and titi monkeys.
So I'm more like a titi monkey, because I can go to the same coffee shop for like months at a time.
And I'm like a squirrel monkey. I have to have something different for dinner every night. I can't have the same thing twice.
I sometimes have the same thing for a month.
No.
That's why I avoid bulk purchase, because
you're a titi monkey. Definitely a titi monkey.
Yeah. So that also laid the foundation of, like, given that you were looking also manual behavior at that time.
Pardon?
A lot of your work in your career is related to manual dexterity and manual behavior of monkeys and infants. So is that also the time where you were looking at differences in manual behavior between the two species?
A little bit, not so much. I noticed that when they were feeding, the squirrel monkeys were generally more interested in handling things than the titi monkeys. Titi monkeys would sometimes, depending on the texture of the food, they would sometimes just eat with their mouths, just put their mouths right into the food bowl. Squirrel monkeys never did that. Whatever they were doing, they picked up in their hands. And they did interesting things with their hands. You know, I knew that squirrel monkeys and titi monkeys both use a whole hand grip. They don't have a precision grip. But the squirrel monkeys in particular still did a lot of interesting things, especially with long objects that would land in different places on their hands and would be held between different fingers. And they would hold things like this in a kind of scissor grip, which is a kind of precision grip, although it's a rather, I would say, weak form of precision grip. And titi monkeys generally didn't do those kinds of things. So yes, I started with that. But the interest in manual dexterity, which I developed in the decade after that, was more from an interest in working with Capuchin monkeys in particular. And one of the things that they are renowned for is manual dexterity. And that was known casually, even when I began to work with them, although very little else was known about them, to be honest.
So for the viewers, to know more about Capuchin monkeys, Doree has a book called The Complete Capuchin.
Kind of some hubris in that title, I would say.
Yeah, because you published more on capuchins after that book than before, right?
I asked the reference librarian to create a data set for me of articles with Capuchin as a keyword in the title or somewhere in the keyword section, published from 2003, because our book was finished in 2003.
Yeah.
And I asked her to do this about 3 or 4 years ago, and she came up with many thousands of references. I mean, it's really just exploded. But it's also true that there is a Capuchin algorithm in some statistical approach to modeling. And there are a lot of papers about Capuchin modeling, the Capuchin algorithm. So they're not all about the living monkeys. There's also the occasional religious reference as well, because it's a Capuchin order in the Catholic Church. So all those 10,000 references are not necessarily all about Capuchins, but probably 9,000 of them are.
Right.
That's my guess.
Right. So when did the shift happen from titi monkeys and squirrel monkeys to Capuchins?
Well, I graduated. I graduated from UC Davis, and I left that lab, and there were no other titi monkeys anywhere. It would have been possible to work with squirrel monkeys. But when I was getting ready to finish my PhD, and I was thinking about where to go next and what to do, it's a big time of indecision, and you don't know what to do. And so I didn't know what to do. Anyway, so I talked a lot to my advisor at the time, and he said, he knew what I was interested in and the sorts of things I like to do. And he said, you might like to work with Capuchin monkeys. It was his idea, because they are pretty easy to keep in captivity. This was already well known. And they're reputed to be, very explorative and good problem solvers. And I had done studies with a Capuchin monkey, with a squirrel and titi monkeys, having to do with little problems. You can't give titi monkeys complicated problems. They're not going to solve them. But I'd looked at that sort of thing. So he knew I was interested in that. So the possibility that I could start my own lab with a species that somebody knew how to care for, not just me, that was appealing, because I knew that I would need, you don't run a lab by yourself with non-human primates. You need veterinarians, you need caretakers, you need a staff, and they need to know something about the animals as well. So working with an exotic species that nobody's ever seen before, it's a recipe for anxiety. So I was happy to think about working with Capuchin monkeys. So I set out to do that. And I started by applying for a postdoctoral fellowship to do a field project, because if you want to be an ethologist, you need to know animal in its natural state. You need to know how they move around and what they are paying attention to, and their social relations and the way they use space and what they're eating. And you just have to have a feeling for the animal. And you're not going to get that. You're not going to get an accurate version of that looking just at the species in captivity, because the captive environment is necessarily so constraining.
Yes.
So I needed to do some kind of a field project. So I applied for a field postdoc, and I wound up doing it was a year-long postdoc, but I wasn't actually in the field for a year. I was in the field for about 6 months, working with weeper capuchins, wedge-capped capuchins. Their name has changed too. They used to be EthoCebus nigrivitatus, and now they are Cebus olivaceus.
And where was this field?
That was in 1981, 80 and 81.
No, but which location?
Oh, in Venezuela.
In Venezuela.
A little bit north of Calabozo.
Okay.
So it's in the sort of southern central part of Venezuela, in what's called the Llanos, which is plains, grassy plains. Sort of like the Cerrado, but the seasons are organized differently. The Cerrado is the grassy plains, savanna-like environment in Brazil.
Right. And then you came back for your faculty position and to start working with Capuchins.
Right. I actually went to San Diego State for a year and then went and did my postdoc. I established a faculty position, and then I took a leave of absence in my second year and went to do a field postdoc. And that worked. And while I was doing the field postdoc, I wrote to a colleague whom I actually never met, a person named Bill London, who worked at the NIH. He was a very well-known researcher in a biomedical field. And he had a friend at an ASP meeting, American Society of Primatologists meeting, tipped me off that he had a colony of capuchin monkeys that he wasn't working with anymore. They were just there, and he was, they were under his supervision indirectly because he was in Bethesda, Maryland, and the monkeys were in Puerto Rico. But they were under his supervision. So I wrote to him and I asked him if I could borrow them and basically take on their care. And then my institution would be responsible for housing them and feeding them and their veterinary care. And they would be off his hands. So he would be rid of this problem. And I would have a colony of monkeys. And he said, yes. So I got a colony of capuchin monkeys. And they came from Puerto Rico. They landed in San Diego. And they became my capuchin monkey colony.
And how many were there?
There were 13. And the offspring remained with me. They were not technically mine personally, but they were associated with the university, whatever institution, academic institution I was at. So they traveled with me from San Diego to Washington to Georgia. So, you pack up the house, you pack up the kids, you pack up the dogs, and you pack up the monkeys.
Yeah.
And you travel a few thousand miles. So yeah, I did that.
I see. So was this colony a breeding colony? So you had monkeys later on, or
right. Yes,
okay.
Yes. It was 3 males and 10 females, and the offspring then were mine. Technically, the founders of the colony always belonged to NIH. Okay. They're all deceased now for many years, but they remained the property of NIH. They just moved with me, and the offspring were mine, so to speak. I mean, I always thought of them as my responsibility.
Right. And now they're in Florida.
And now they are in Florida, some of them, but some of them also retired earlier to a place in Yemassee, South Carolina. That's another story. So
okay, I see. So Doree, what did you start working on? Like, what were the initial studies you did on monkeys in capuchins at the University of Georgia? What was your research program like?
Let me back up a little bit and tell you that the field project I did focused on their foraging behavior. And I specifically wanted to look at how they used their hands and whether there was already at the time a thought that they might use objects as tools. So I went to see if I saw anything like that. So that meant I should pay attention to what they were doing with their hands during feeding. So that's what I tried to do. So I observed feeding behavior. Of course, I was observing from a distance, and their hands are relatively small, and the things that they eat are even smaller. So of course, I couldn't see precisely what they were doing with their hands. So it was a more general categorization of what sort of general action are they doing. So an ethogram approach, are they banging? Are they biting? Are they pulling? Are they hitting? Are they rubbing?
Yeah.
Like that. So that's what I did. And of course, I studied what they were doing besides eating. So there's data on their time budgets and things like that. So I did that kind of a field study focused on foraging behavior, but with attention to time budgets and use of space. So when I came back to San Diego and established the laboratory colony, I had some idea what the monkeys should be doing, and I set up to try to construct a captive setting so that they could do those things. Yes. So we set up, we talked the university into allowing us to use hay as the substrate in the cages, and we put browse in the cages so they had things to pull at, and we tried to give them an enriched environment that would allow them to do the things that I knew they could do. But then we set about doing all kinds of experiments. At San Diego, I only had master's students, so we did fairly short projects. So we did, with a student named Mike Costello, did the first study on manual dexterity. I had another student who looked at lateral asymmetry, and a student who had the idea that these monkeys could use probing tools. And I said, go for it. I never saw that. So we made a little box. He made it, a box with a PVC tube that went into an interior container with applesauce or maple syrup in it. I don't remember which we used at first. And we filled their cage with browse, and we put some sticks in it. And the capuchin monkeys were living with squirrel monkeys at the time. We had a mixed species colony there. And the capuchin monkeys, right away, they were taking the sticks out and licking it, and then they were putting them back in. And then we took those sticks away and they broke off the branches and used those. So they created their own tools by subtraction. And they used them to get food out of this apparatus. The squirrel monkeys never did. Never.
And these were laboratory raised monkeys.
Yeah, these were the monkeys from Puerto Rico.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
They were, well, they were, as to my knowledge, they were all lab-born monkeys. I did later get one monkey that was known to be captured in the field, the oldest monkey we had.
Yeah.
But his behavior was not materially different than the monkeys that were born in captivity in the context where we studied them. So,
right.
Yeah.
So what was the motivation of studying the mental behavior of monkeys? Like someone can ask, why do we do that?
Well, my father asked me that a lot.
Yeah.
Why does anybody pay you to do this?
Yeah.
That was his question. And I never had a really good answer for that. Well, partly, so there's the sort of larger societal good, and there's the personal motivation. The personal motivation is pure curiosity. The societal motivation is understanding other species allows us to know ourselves better, as well as understand our natural world. We are in the world, we are of the world. It's enriching to know about it. So, but that's a very abstract, there's nothing practical in that. And it's true that studying Capuchin monkeys and how they use their hands is never going to cure a disease or create the next technological leap forward. No, it's not that kind of work. It's informing us about the natural world and about ourselves by virtue of comparison with another species. So that's it.
Yeah. For those who actually have the eyes to appreciate the beauty of the human hand, when you actually look at the hands of other primates, and in ways they are constrained not to do certain things or to be able to do only certain kind of things. Once you start studying comparative psychology or comparative biomechanics of the hand, it just opens up your eyes to, this complexity. It's probably the most complex mechanical assembly we have.
Well, some people might say the foot is there too, but
yes, the foot people.
But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of joints and there's a lot of movement.
Right.
And when you see other species use their hands, you can appreciate some things we can do that they can't, but there are also things they can do that we can't. And so, it's really, it's both humbling and exciting. It's both.
Yeah, especially the wrist. The way, but the way the muscles actually, the way the ligaments kind of move through the wrist, and when you look at like how thin they are, and how wrist kind of acts as a bottleneck, still allowing the whole dexterous control, it's mind-boggling.
Well, and I wonder, you and I have worked on a paper about all the medical problems that can arise in humans because of our upright posture. But humans also have a tendency to overuse or strain their wrists, carpal tunnel, etc. Do non-human primates ever get carpal tunnel? Do you know? I'm betting you don't.
I don't know of, but given what kind of behaviors monkeys have in the wild, how long they leap, and the amount of forces acting on those wrists, while they're actually jumping from branches, it should be a lot.
But they don't. I'll bet they don't. I don't know. I've never heard of it as any kind of a syndrome.
Yeah, I've not. I myself have spent years working, like watching monkeys in the wild, but I've never seen a monkey, with like they have limping hands because of broken bone due to some fight between groups and stuff. But I've never seen a monkey like tired with a hand or just using one hand, the other hand being intact. Nothing like that. Yeah,
they don't seem to injure their hands very often.
No.
Anyway, so where were we? I forgot.
We were at the motivation to study comparative dexterity of the hand.
And another point is that you can study in a non-human primate humans are extremely social, and non-human primates are also extremely social. Primates as a whole are extremely social creatures, but non-human primates do not have the layer of culture and language that humans have. So to study an extremely social primate in the absence of language, to get at something,
Right.
I want to say purer, that's not quite the right word, but with fewer layers. It doesn't have the language layer or the cultural technological layer that humans do. So non-human primates, like humans, construct their environment in some way so that the environment in which individuals are reared reflects the behavior, the accomplishments and knowledge of the group that they're growing up in. That's true in non-human animals as much as it is in human animals, but they don't have the layers of cultural artifacts around,
Right.
they don't have culturally variable ways of dressing and ways of creating structures. And, I mean, it's just a simpler arrangement, but it's still extremely social. So one can study the development of individuals in a social setting with a slightly simpler setup. And of course, that's been the basis for a lot of the work with non-human primates.
We discussed this issue in our recent book chapter on affordances, right? That how language complicates a lot of studies in humans, even in infant development, because as soon as you acquire language, there's an additional layer of complexity which operates symbolic control over behavior, which does not happen in primates that often.
Yeah, well, not with language, at least. Perhaps in some other way that we don't know about, but not in the ways that we know it. So they're a different system. They're also extremely social, but they're not social in exactly the same ways that humans are. So that makes them a really interesting comparison model for humans. And also valuable for people, for people who are doing more applied kind of work, like the consequences of separations, the effects of different kinds of drugs for treating anxiety or whatever. I mean, non-human primates offer a way to do that ethically or more ethically than you can do prospective studies with non-human primates that you can't do with humans for ethical reasons.
Right.
So the biomedical community has uses for studying monkeys in that way. And of course, the biomedical community uses all sorts of species where the animal is simply a vehicle for some sort of tissue that they want to study. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about behavioral studies where the whole organism is the object of interest.
Right. But most of that kind of medical research, even psychiatric research, is focused or uses rhesus macaques, for instance. So do you think
there's a lot done with squirrel monkeys too, and marmosets, increasingly with marmosets.
But do you think that's a historical accident that Carpenter had a lot of monkeys brought on a ship from India to the US, and since then we had these, basically producing colonies, so they were available in plenty? Or do you think capuchins are a better model to actually study human behavior than rhesus macaques are?
It depends on what you want to study. So macaques are far more despotic in they're more hierarchical in their social organization. They're much more rigid in their social organization than capuchin monkeys are, or squirrel monkeys, or any South American monkey. If what you want to study has to do with the stress of social rank, macaques are a good species to look at. If you want to look at something that has less emphasis on dominance and submission, then other species become more interesting models for what you want to study. So capuchins are a great model for things to do with motor skills and learning, instrumental learning. And I mean, I don't know if they are better than, but they are certainly interesting from that point of view.
Right. So then how did you transition to studying infants? Because a lot of your early work has capuchins as well as human infants.
Well, because so there is a long tradition in comparative psychology of so crosstalk between comparative and developmental psychology. Of course, working with human infants, they are also nonverbal or preverbal.
Yeah.
And so you can't interrogate an infant and say, well, what did you think about that? Did you see that clearly? Or did you hear me clearly? Can you understand that word? You can't ask. Language is not part of the testing paradigm, the experimental paradigm. And so, in that sense, developmental psychologists face the same challenge as comparative psychologists of inquiring about how their subjects perceive the world and how they act in the world without language. So there are several well-known paradigms and theories in developmental psychology that have been sort of adapted or adopted for use with non-human species. So there was for a while a strong interest in taking Piagetian notions of stages of development and seeing if one could see the same stages of development taking place in other species, in non-human primates. So I'm not myself a fan of that approach, but that was a very popular approach for a while. And it's still around. It's not really gone away. It's just, neo-Piagetian work with humans is ongoing, and it is a vigorous line of work. It's kind of, it's morphed a bit. It's not as it was
No, it has a very similar structure yet.
But anyway, so so the paradigms that people use to study cognition and behavioral development in non-human primates were adapted from developmental psychology. And it was from the beginning, it was proposed that studying development in non-human primates could give us insight into development of human primates. So that was already an accepted paradigm of thinking when I was developing my lab. And I was always interested in infant development and maternal care. And I did studies on that with group housed Capuchin monkeys in my lab that were reproducing. We did a lot of studies on infant development. And I became interested in the motoric aspects of development and the organization of states. So sleeping and waking and the organization of behavior from its initially less organized state at birth. It's already rather organized in humans and non-humans, but it changes developmentally, and infants begin to spend more time in an alert awake state, and they begin to use their hands, and their attention is organized differently in that state than in others. And so I'm interested in that sort of topic, and we did studies along those lines with observational studies, and we had a couple of infants that we had to hand rear. We never intentionally hand reared an infant, but every now and then things happen, and you wind up with an infant, just like with a sheep. Every now and then you wind up with a bottle baby. So we looked at motor development in infants that were reared on the mother versus in a normal setting, in a group with mixed sex, mixed age, and in babies that were reared in a nursery kind of setting with an inanimate surrogate.
And did you see significant differences across?
Well, the differences have to do with postural control. So because infant Capuchin monkeys and squirrel monkeys cling to a carrier. This is true of a lot of New World monkeys. The monkeys cling to a carrier, and they are not mobile. They're so arboreal, and arboreal New World primates do not immediately get off the mother at birth and run around. They cling to a carrier for some weeks or months, depending on the species. And then eventually they dismount and they begin to clamber and move independently. So for several weeks, they're not moving independently. And that's true for human infants as well. But human infants are not usually holding onto a support. They can, but that's not the normal.
They don't.
Normally supported.
They can't even they don't have the forces as well. They can't use
at birth,
the forces.
They can. At birth, human infants can hold their weight. They can be suspended like this and hold their weight.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Human babies can. But typically they are not left in that position. Okay. I mean, they are gathered and supported. But but non-human primates, of course, the babies are on their own for the most part. They're clinging without maternal support. There may be some maternal support, but mostly they're clinging on their own.
Yeah.
And a monkey mother is liable to go leaping off somewhere at any moment. The baby cannot just let go.
Right.
There's never a time when a clinging infant is loose with no grip. That they can't. They are always clinging. So the development of using your arms to explore the environment and doing something instrumental with your hands, bringing an object to the mouth, whatever, is restricted by postural control. In a hand-reared setting, on a surrogate, we used fuzzy paint rollers as surrogates. They're easy to wash, and they're definitely nice to hang on to for the babies. That's a stationary, even if you set it up with some little springs, which we did.
Yeah.
It's basically a stationary support. And so we noticed that the Capuchin baby, I don't have much to say about the squirrel monkey because that baby developed and went back to the group very quickly. But the Capuchin baby was reaching out for objects and using its hands in ways that mother-reared babies are much less likely to do, because the mother isn't going to sit still. The Capuchin baby could let go. So, so from the age at which it had enough strength to sort of push up, do a bit of a push up on the roller with using its arms and reach out with one hand, it was already busy. So the constraint, the age pattern, the age-related pattern of the onset of manipulation reflects not just some intrinsic rate of development of bone and muscle and whatever, it also reflects environmental opportunities. Right. So the opportunities for movement are different in one environment than another. In a hand-reared setting with a stationary surrogate or a stationary support than the mother. Anyway, that's a long story.
And we know now from some work, right? For example, even wearing diapers can change how you start walking.
Sure. Yeah. So there were some differences to note there, but anyway, so we studied infant development more intensely and with many more subjects in infants born into the groups. And we looked at the onset of their manual activity. And we found that baby Capuchins begin to manipulate objects, to begin to handle them, and begin to use their hands to explore the environment very early in life, as soon as they have enough postural support and stability to hang on with one hand and reach out with another. So that's, somewhere around 8 or 9 or 10 weeks of age. And then that takes off. And as soon as they are independent, moving independently, they are extremely interested in handling everything. And this reaches a crescendo in their juvenile years, in the second year of life, where they are motorically able to make all the same moves as the adults. They're smaller, but they can use their hands and use their limbs, and they have good balance. They can move in all the same ways as the adults can. And they are just all over objects. They are just busy. And they're much more likely than adults to be taking objects and combining them in some way. Often that's a very simple way. So they're taking something and smashing it on the wall or rubbing it on the wall, in the case of in a captive setting, or pushing something through the wire mesh, if there's wire mesh, or whatever the surface is, they're putting some object against that surface and fiddling around with it in some way. They will also take two loose objects and put them together in some way as well. And adults do all the same things, but they do it at a much slower, lower rate.
Right.
Yeah, it's much less frequent in adults. Adults are busy handling food and eating, and they're not doing a whole lot else. They can, but they generally are not so interested. So in our studies, we could see in the captive setting this terrific rise in motor activity, instrumental activity, directed at objects and surfaces. And in the wild, if you track the development, the ontogeny of foraging and weaning, and if you think about when they're their teeth erupt and when they are able to eat the same things that adults eat.
Yeah.
It's in this period, it's in the second year of life. They're still nursing, there's gradual weaning. Somewhere in the second year of life, the mother finally says, we're done. And they're weaned, usually, even sometimes older than 2, the infant will go back and nurse a little bit. But generally, they are nutritionally self-sufficient somewhere in the middle of the second year of life. And they've got enough of their permanent teeth, not all, but enough of them. And they have enough body mass, and they are busy with their hands in every way possible that allows them to feed themselves. Even so, they are less efficient foragers than adults. That's been shown in several field studies. Of course, in captivity, it doesn't really matter because nobody starves in captivity. There's food all over the place and it's very easy to eat. It doesn't require a lot of processing.
So are there cases of these bottle babies in the wild?
Orphans?
Yeah, or orphans?
There are orphans, yes, but
or where the mothers reject the babies.
Where the mothers reject, well, they would die. I mean, a newborn that is rejected would die, and I don't know. Of course, there's mortality. There's neonatal mortality. Is it because the mother didn't accept the baby? I have no idea. It's for firstborns. So the mortality rate for firstborn offspring is higher. That's across, as far as I know, across mammalian species, that the neonatal mortality for the firstborn is higher. That's high. It's true in Capuchin monkeys. It's true in humans too. It's just true. So, but whether that has to do with maternal rejection, I don't know.
Okay. So
I don't know, but let me add, I don't know personally of any case. In the wild where a mother has rejected an infant. We do know some cases in captivity, but that's always hard to interpret because one doesn't know the history of the mother, and who knows, and the context is so constraining. And so anyway.
So where do human infants come in your studies?
Well, because I was interested in, I was interested in the onset of motor skills in humans that are like those seen in non-humans, and vice versa. I was interested in looking at the skill development in humans too. So we did a study. This is quite a bit later. So we did a study. The one I like the best. I'll tell you about the one I like the best. We did a study that had to do with it's not so much a matter of motor dexterity as eye-hand coordination. So we did a study where, and we did this, I did a lot of work collaboratively with people at the Language Research Center in Atlanta, and they had chimpanzees and bonobos. And so I worked collaboratively with them and did several studies that involved Capuchin monkeys and chimpanzees and bonobos, or sometimes just chimpanzees, because after a while the bonobos weren't there anymore. So the study I'm about to tell you about was associated with that collaborative project with the Language Research Center.
Yeah, at Emory, right?
No, at Georgia State.
At Georgia State, okay.
Georgia State University. And my principal collaborator there was Charlie Menzel.
Yeah.
So we did a study where we presented a tray, a wooden tray. I'm using my hands down below, but you can't see them. So all of this has a lot of gesture with it, but you can't see it. Anyway, we had a tray and we cut into the surface of the tray was a piece of wood about 1/2 an inch or 3/4 of an inch thick. And we cut into it a slot that was about 1/2 an inch deep. And we had some PVC shapes that exactly matched the slot. So you could take, it was like a wood puzzle. It was like a puzzle. You could take the piece and line it up with the slot and put it in, and it would be done. And we gave that to the chimpanzees and the monkeys as a what I'd call a give back task. So we gave them the tray and we gave them a stick And after they put the stick in the slot, they could give it back to us by sliding it beneath some piece of their caging. So there would be a bottom pipe and mesh above it, but there was a space big enough to slide the tray back. So we gave them 2 pieces and they gave us back one complete set. And we gave them different shapes. So, and these were not just random shapes. These were on purpose selected to have 1 long axis or 2 axes like a T, or 3 axes like a tomahawk. So it has a long axis and a you know, and if you can think of it as a y-axis, an x-axis, and then something going on. So that had 3 different things to align. A straight stick had really just 1 long axis to align.
Yeah.
So we gave these shapes to the monkeys and the apes. First, we gave them an open tray where they just had to take the stick and put it down and hand it back. So they learned the give back part of the task.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, how do monkeys know that they have to give it back to you?
Oh, because we give them a tray that is just a ring and a stick, and all they have to do is put the stick down and give it back, and they learn that pretty quickly.
Okay.
Plus, you know, the monkeys that I was working with and the apes that I was working with, they were experienced.
Yeah,
they were not naive. They were our partners in research for a long time.
Yeah.
And they'd already done a number of tasks where they were supposed to give things back to us. So they were very happy to give things back to us.
Yeah.
And this is just one new way of giving things back to us for a treat. So, I mean, we didn't really even have to train them. We gave them the tray, we gave them the stick, they put the stick in, they gave that back to us, they got a treat, said, okay, we know what this is about.
Right.
And then we were good to go. So the training was really minimal, but of course there had to be some.
Yeah.
So we gave them these shapes and we looked at how they put the shape into the slot. And the answer is very badly, extremely badly. And we were really surprised. And we expected the chimpanzees, we expected the apes to be better at this, but they were not. They were exactly as bad as the Capuchin.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
It was very interesting. And it was extremely surprising. But it does make sense if you think about it with respect to how non-human primates use objects as tools and how humans use objects as tools. So I haven't told you what the kids did yet. Shall I tell you that part? I'll tell you.
Sure. No, first, let's do this here. Let's talk about what they do in the wild. Yeah, what tools they use.
Oh, the wild. Wait, I haven't finished telling you about aligning objects. I want to finish the topic of alignment because that makes sense.
Yeah.
So apes and monkeys, neither group was very good at aligning. So then we thought, okay, well, let's go look at kids because, you know, this is something that's really important for using an object as a tool in some sort of flexible way. So we did exactly the same study with human children. The give back part of it was arranged a little differently.
And how old were the kids?
They were, let's see, 11 months. Let's see, no, they were 2 and 3. So we had 12. Let's see, 24. No, I'm getting studies mixed up. Yeah, with cups, we used 11 and 12 month olds. So they were 2 to 3 years old.
Okay.
At three age points. And I have to go back and read the paper to know if I've got the exact ages. But basically, they were old enough to follow instructions. So they were at least.
So if I can guess, if I guess what I was doing when I was 2 to 3 years old, I don't remember it perfectly, but I think I would have.
What you remember at all?
Yeah, but I think I would have solved this task by the time I was 2.5 years old.
Well, so what we found is that the same task that we gave to children, they were very good at it. The stick, even 2-year-olds can put the stick into the slot, no problem. Just aligning one long axis, no problem. 2-year-olds could do that. Even the T, they could do that. You know, that was a little hard for 24 months. But, you know, gradually they were able to do that too. And they would get the correct end. So, you know, the slot has 2 features and they would get the cross feature near the cross feature of the slot, even if it didn't go in very well. So they had it largely oriented with 2 features considered together.
Right.
The tomahawk is more difficult because you have to rotate that
Yeah.
You have to translate it and rotate it, and that's difficult. 3-year-olds could do that, but 2-year-olds were not able to do that one. But together, all told, they were vastly superior to the non-human primates in this task.
So,
and
yeah,
so that means something really fundamental about the way we, even as very young children, perceive the world and act in the world. We see edges, we see objects in a way that's very different, that we can act with them in a way that's very different than non-human primates.
And this opens up a whole new paradigm, because I think most dominant ideas are that we differ in terms of from primates in terms of our motor skills, but this kind of work actually brings perception and give perception also an equal footing in terms of differences across species.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have an extremely precise grip, but if you can't see what dimensions should be aligned with what good is that going to do you? So yeah. So to me, that's a really interesting finding, and I hope that other people will expand on that work and look. I mean, you know,
well,
I consider what we did is just kind of pilot studies. We just did this first thing.
Yeah.
Now it needs more work.
No, we discovered a much kind of a advanced version of this on with adult capuchins, right? When we were comparing different stones, what we found that they could not compare the amount of force, the different force these stones produce at the end.
Right. Well, they can't adjust their production of force.
Also highlighting a perceptual limitation rather than ability to actually move those stones.
That one doesn't have a visual component, but I mean, it could be, you know, it could be something very general, or it might be modality particular, and each modality has its own constraints. I don't know. That's something would be interesting to consider.
Right. So a lot of your early work with comparative cognition is related to perception and similar kind of abilities, which are precursors.
Perception of space, perception of objects in space, movement in space with respect to objects, either moving the objects or moving around objects. I did a study. I think you probably don't know about this one. I don't think if I ever told you, and you may not have ever run into it. It was like moving the body in near space. It was with squirrel and titi monkeys. I don't know if you ever saw this. So I gave them this was a single subject study. I mean, one subject at a time, not in a group setting. So the monkey was sitting in a kind of testing cage, and it had in front of it some vertical bars that it could reach through to take food out of a little board in front that had wells, little hemispheric dips in it that we put treats in. And so there was a row of wells. I think there were 7, if I recall. And there were these bars that hindered the movements of the arm left and right, kind of made it a biomechanically awkward sort of task, depending on the position you were in and the position where the food was.
Yeah.
So what I was interested in was whether the monkeys would be equally willing to move their whole bodies from side to side to reach for the food when it was in different positions. And we organized that by putting a clear plastic panel in front of some of the bars so that they could only reach from certain bars. So we could put the food in the middle, and we could close off the middle section, and they would have to go to the edge and reach around. Or we could put it on one end, and we could occlude the middle, and they could reach from one side or way over, you know. So it was a test of their willingness to move. And that was interesting because they did something unexpected, of course. We did find that they were equally willing to move side to side to do their reaches, although the titi monkeys would rather not. They would rather sit in one place and reach. But in the end, they would move. If that was the only way to get the food, they would move. If they could get it by not reaching, by not moving, they would not move. But they also did this interesting thing, this perseverative behavior of just putting their hand directly into the panel repeatedly. Squirrel monkeys didn't do that, or they did it much less often. But the titi monkeys would just persist in trying to put their hand through that clear panel. And, you know, it isn't that they don't know that the panel's not there. It's that they can't inhibit that movement, that they're still working out the properties of that panel in front of them. And that was very interesting to me. So I was looking into that with Esther Thalen, did a really interesting study with that with young children, where because people talk about that as a something that indicates a fundamental cognitive development in children when they can reach around a barrier.
Kind of a milestone, yeah.
Yeah, but Esther Thalen did this really clever study where she had some children who were exposed to clear boxes to play with, and some children who were not. And then she presented them both with a standard test situation for reaching around a clear barrier. And the kids who had experience with clear barriers they had no problem with that task. And of course, the kids who had no experience had to learn it on the spot. And so they made some errors before they realized that they had to reach around the barrier. So anyway, once again, individual experience.
Do this work has implications for human development in general? Because for instance, I have cousins who have been playing with an iPad since they were like a year and a half to 2 years old, right? They're really good at it, and they learn things symbolically with icons and everything. And then you have I think it was New York Times or some other prominent publication where professors from medical schools are complaining that now the surgical residents, they had never used a knife before in their life. Like they never had to cut a watermelon or a pineapple. So they come to the surgery, and now there's no selection process for manual dexterity. And then you have these really brilliant students who have no manual skills.
Right. So yeah, I can see that coming. And we don't use our hands in handwriting so much either.
No.
People are very good at typing. I can tell you that I cannot type as fast with my thumb as most people that I see.
Actually, it's not the case. So for instance, what is happening now is this is what I was told, that first of all, we don't write as much. The kids don't write as much, and they also don't go through this QRTY training.
They don't what?
They don't go through this keyboard training in a very strict fashion. So they don't use the full 8 fingers or 10 fingers, as well as they don't write. So it's like when it comes to writing, it's all over the place, as well as when it's come to typing, it's all over the place.
Well, at some point, enough must learn how to use a keyboard, because that seems to be working. But I'm sure they're doing it all with one thumb.
There's a lot of thumb usage, yes. In fact, there's a new thing called thumb arthritis.
I'm not surprised. And there's going to be a thumb brace specifically to prevent you from doing that.
Okay.
Oh, well, yeah. So, sure, the things that are around you impact the skills you develop, for sure. Yeah.
Right. That's great. So now I think we should come to the EthoCebus project.
Okay. Yeah.
So
we've been talking for an hour. Yep.
Yeah. So viewers, so Doree, as we discussed, was one of the co-founders of the EthoCebus project. That's when I also did my PhD. So I collected most of the data for my PhD in Brazil on wild monkeys. It's an amazing place in northeast Brazil, in a state called Piauí. And the place is called Fazenda Boa Vista, and that's when we have these Capuchins who use big stones to crack nuts, and they have been celebrities, I would say, in the world of animal behavior and ethology. That particular group of monkeys, covered by almost all popular science channels like Discovery, Animal Planet, National Geographic. So, Doree, how did you discover those monkeys there and establish that research program in such a remote area?
Well, I didn't discover them, of course, because I didn't go there until I had a reason to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
So when we were going back to writing The Complete Capuchin, which I was writing with Elisabetta Wieselbergi and Linda Fedigan in the early 2000s, and we asked Stephen Nash, a well-known illustrator, to do some illustrations for our book. And he graciously agreed to do that. He's a really nice person. So we were in contact with him frequently about the images in our book, and we visited him, and we were good friends with Stephen Nash. And he sent us a copy of an article published by a photographer named Peter Oxford, a nature photographer. He published this article in the magazine BBC Wildlife. And in it, he had pictures of monkeys that he reported were wild monkeys using these huge stones. The stones were bigger, the stone was wider than the chest of the monkey holding it. And the picture showed a monkey, one of his pictures showed a monkey holding the stone somewhere up near the height of its head, standing on two legs and in the action of bringing the stone down. And he had about a page and a half narrative about how this happened, and he included information that he was told, I don't know by whom, but it was along the lines that you often see in a non-technical report about the parents teach their babies how to do this, and we thought, okay, we need to go. So we, in this case, is me and Elisabetta. Linda Fedigan was already running a field project in Costa Rica, a very long-running, excellent field project at Santa Rosa in Costa Rica. So she had her hands full and didn't want to take on something new. But Elisabetta and I knew we had to go because she and I had both studied captive monkeys using objects as tools. And in my case, it was using probing tools. And in her case, it was using percussive tools. And we'd studied that for a long time, and then we'd switched our focus to studying feeding behavior because it seemed more relevant to the animal's ecology than using tools, which was interesting to psychologists, but had no relation to the biology of the animals that we could tell after a long time thinking about it. So we quit looking at tool use and we started looking at feeding. And then this report shows up of wild monkeys doing this, what looked like Hercules. Using the stone.
It actually looks like when you go in the wild and you see these monkeys coming in the wild, lifting that stones. It's like going back in history and you're seeing your ancestors running like a factory of nut cracking.
It's something like that. So Elisabetta and I engineered a reason to go to Brazil to attend a meeting, and I finagled some funding from the National Science Foundation as a supplement to a grant that I had at the time, that NSF can do when the program manager thinks that there's some really interesting thing that just needs money. So I got a little bit of money to fund our trip to the site. It took us a while to figure out where this place was because Peter Oxford never identified the place in his photojournalism piece. And we had to backtrack. We had to ask him where he was. And he said, well, I really don't know because I didn't organize the travel. Someone set this up for me. You'll have to talk to the travel agent where I was because I have no idea. So we tracked it back with some detective work, figured out where he had gone, and contacted the people that we needed to contact and asked if we could go, and explained why we wanted to go. And, so there was quite a bit of conversation about that because it was he had gone there as part of an ecotourism sort of project, but we were going for a different purpose. We weren't going for tourism, and we didn't want to pretend we were going for tourism. We wanted them to know that we were going as scientists and we would be writing something about our observations and publishing them, and we would, hopefully want to come back, and so they could think about that, decide whether they wanted us to even set foot, because it's private property. Okay. So they had to know our intentions, and anyway, we managed to sort that all out. And Elisabetta and I went, and we took with us a Brazilian colleague, Patricia Itzar, whom neither one of us had met until we set out to go on this project. And fortunately, we all got along just fine. So we went up as a trio, and we came back as a trio, and we've been working together as a trio ever since. And that's 20 years ago now. So we went to confirm that the monkeys were really wild, because they could have been somebody's backyard pet. we had no way to know that from the photographs. We wanted to know if they were really wild, and if they were, we wanted to know, is this really a common behavior, or is this something they just do once a year, or you know, what's happening? And is it all the animals in the group? Is it everybody, or is it just a few individuals? What's going on? So
this
we
was
went
2003, right?
2003.
And
Yeah.
until then, nobody knew, other than that article, there was like no footage of them, or it was
No,
not in the common
no,
knowledge
no.
that this is what
No,
they do
I mean,
there.
it was known in that region by the local
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
why, you know, when people say you discovered it, I said, no,
Right, right.
they knew for centuries, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
but they weren't telling scientists, and scientists weren't asking them.
yeah.
So it was a locally known phenomenon that was new to science. So we showed up, and the monkeys were wild, and we documented as much as we could in a few days. We were only there for 5 days, and the monkeys didn't show up at the place where the owner of the ranch had.
Yeah.
So he had habituated them a little bit. He had provisioned them at one part of their home range so that they would show up, and he'd done that for the ecotourism side of the business. The guy who was in charge of the owner of the ranch, had mentioned to the ecotourism chief that it was mainly people coming to look at birds. It's an amazing area for bird biodiversity.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes.
So it was set up for people to come watch birds. And the person who owned the ranch mentioned to the person running the ecotourism group that people might like to see the monkeys too. They're really fun to watch.
Yeah.
And the supervisor said, well, if you can make it so that the monkeys show up regularly, and you could take people to a place, because people are not going to go tracking around after the monkeys.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you go to a place and watch them like they do for the birds, then that's possible. And if you do that, I'll give you a sum of money for opening this up, you know, kind of an investment. So the owner of the ranch did that. He provisioned the monkeys with cashew nuts and other things, corn and food, at one part of their home range that they frequented fairly often. And they began to come more regularly. This makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, and then he constructed a kind of a blind so that people were, with palm thatch, so that people were shielded. They could see out, but it was like a bird blind. It was very much configured after a bird watching kind of setup. So that's what he did. And so when we arrived, he put some food out for the monkeys out in that place, which we later called our outdoor lab, but he called it by another name. But anyway, this part of the home range, and stationed one of the children out there to keep an eye out for the monkeys, but they didn't show up. So meanwhile, we just went around. We said, okay, the monkeys aren't here, but we aren't going to wait for them. Show us these anvils. Show us where the monkeys crack these nuts. Show us the nuts. Show us the landscape. Where is the water? Where are the stones? What's going on? So we walked a lot. We walked up and down hills. We walked all over the place. And he said, here's an anvil, here's an anvil, here's an anvil, here's an anvil, here's an anvil. It's full of nuts on the top. You could see all these shells.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it was walking through a lithic industrial zone.
Right.
There were anvils all over the place.
I've seen that myself as well. Yeah.
And there are nutshells on many of these anvils. Some look like they've been abandoned, but many are in use. And there are stones on them or near them. And some of the stones you can see have debris from the nuts on them. And it was obvious that they've been used. And they're all over the place. They're even way up on top of ridges where there's no palm tree, you know, for the height of this ridge, which is maybe only 50 or 60 feet, but it's still a climb. And you know, and we said, how did this stone get up here? Because there's a river cobble kind of quartzite stone on top of a sandstone ridge that it is obviously not full of quartzite. So well, how did this get up here? He said, well, the monkeys carry the stones up there. And we're thinking, well, oh my God, you know, the monkeys are transporting.
And these are quadrupedal monkeys, so they have to do a lot of work to carry these stones as well as
carrying stones. When the monkeys, we didn't know exactly how much they weighed, but you know, judging they weighed 2-3 kilos, something like that. They're carrying stones around that weigh a kilo. We weighed the stones. We went when we were traipsing around, we took a scale with us,
Yeah.
and we weighed the stones, and we measured the handles, and we measured things. And the owner said to us, "Wow, nobody's ever measured anything before." And he wrote things down. He said, "Wow, people never wrote things down before." I mean, he was used to people just watching birds for
Right,
the
right.
pleasure of watching birds. So this idea that we would quantify and measure and ask all these questions, and that was
Right.
new. So we explored as much as we could in 5 days. And on the last day we were there, the monkeys showed up, and we were able to watch them and take a little video of them, and convince ourselves they really, almost every animal in the group did this right in front of our eyes. And we said, this is amazing. We have to figure out what's going on, when they're doing this, how they're doing it, where they're doing it, how it relates to their ecology, how it relates to the landscape, how it relates to their bodies, what's going on. So we went home and wrote a grant and started our project.
So this project started after writing the complete Capuchin. That's
Yes, almost exactly. So that the complete Capuchin, we did, it was in time for us to include one picture in the front of the book that was from Peter Oxford, because we didn't have such beautiful pictures.
Yeah.
And we included one picture that this had been discovered. So, yeah.
Nice.
So I keep telling Elizabetta and Patricia, we need to write a book now that is the complete Capuchin with nut cracking,
So what would you what title would you have? Like, you cannot have a complete
no
Capuchin
idea.
2, right?
No, I don't think we'd say complete Capuchin edition 2. I think it needs a new name, but I think I would call it Letters to Xenon.
Letters to Xenon. And Xenon was the monkey, is a monkey
In my lab. No, Xenon
in the lab. Yeah, in the lab.
Xenon was
I remember the name from the
star of
paper.
many studies in our lab. He was
Yeah.
so dexterous and good and paid attention to things and attentive and careful. And
So for viewers who have not worked with monkeys, every monkey has a character and very different personality.
Sure.
And you can just see how they move their tails and kind of guess who they are. Their signatures
How
all
they
over.
look.
Yeah, how they move.
Look at someone else.
Yeah. And their temperament and everything. Yeah. Nice. And that opened up a lot of projects. And my PhD was also, on the same monkeys. But a little different work than what you were doing.
So I love that project because it has all sides of biology in it, and it extends into geology and into climate and into the phenology of the plants and I mean, it's the whole place and the animals in it and what they are doing in that place. So I love that.
No, it does. And I think that project also turned more technical towards the end compared to a lot of other such projects because of different constraints. Like, for example, chimpanzees and orangutans. Like, we actually were able to do the biomechanics of this behavior.
People are trying with other species, and that's good. And they will get there. They will get there. It's beginning. But I think our work prompted people to try, because I think thought it wasn't possible, or it just didn't occur to them that people doing that field work were not thinking about these questions. I don't know. Maybe it's a confluence of many things. The technology improved to the point where it was possible. We implemented it. If we could do it, they could do it. Probably many things. But I think we kind of gave it a nudge.
I want
to add one thing. So we even managed to take a force plate to the field and install it in the soil, right in where and without any training or coercion or any sort of artificial forcing of behavior. We managed to entice the monkeys to walk across our force plate while they were carrying a heavy stone. So they are walking bipedally across a force plate. And that was definitely a first. And I hope other people can manage to do that again, because that was a really interesting study.
So on that note, I don't think we have done a lot of work with posture and force weight even in human infants. There's a lot of scope to work to do much more quantitative studies, especially like if you think about it, like when infant starts to or learns how to, walk or stand. And that's kind of a milestone, right? Like the first time you stand. What exactly happens? Like there can't be an instant change in physiology. But there's some instant change which leads to, the ability to control the posture, erect
Right.
posture.
Right. Well, there's actually a lot. I mean, so of course, two people come to mind when I think of, and one is Esther Thalen, who had a lot to say about that, and then Karen Adolph.
Yeah.
And they, of course, knew each other. Although Karen Adolph worked with Eleanor Gibson, not Esther Thalen. But anyway, yeah. And so Karen Adolph is doing center of pressure studies with human infants now. They have babies walking on horse plate. So there, and that I don't think she's the first person to have done that kind of work, although I don't quite know. But there's a lot of work on babies walking now, much more than there used to be.
Right.
People used to think it was something, well, anyway, there were a lot of old ideas that have fallen by the wayside now, and the recognition that this is a learned skill, and it's a learned skill, and there are all sorts of components to it that are developing prior to the child standing up and walking. And then walking, Karen Idov has this wonderful paper entitled How Do Children Learn to Walk? Thousands of steps and hundreds of falls a day.
Yes.
It's something along those lines. I probably don't have it exactly correct, but
it's
a title, and you know the answer to the question.
Right? Yes, right. And it also brings in the importance of falls and the importance of failure in that learning process.
Exactly.
So Doree, what were so where did this whole EthoCebus project took us in terms of studying monkeys and comparative psychology, and what is the state of this project currently?
Well, the state of the project currently is that Elisabetta and I have both retired. So I would say we are honorary co-directors at this point, because neither one of us is currently sending students to the project or collecting more data. I could show you off to my right here, I have a filing cabinet full of data that have not yet seen the light of day.
Okay.
So I have, 20 years worth of work off to my right. Also a lot of lab studies that I haven't, I've got lots of things to finish. So I have lots of things to finish from the EthoCebus project, as well as all other sorts of projects in there. But and Elisabetta, I think she's not planning to write more. Patricia is hard at work. And she's actually expanded the project. She now runs several different field sites, and she has students working in many parts of Brazil, all with Capuchin monkeys. And she's interested in phenotypic variation, in the sources of phenotypic variation, which are related to environmental variation. And she's interested in how variation arises and how it melds with the environment where the animals are living. So this includes behavioral variation, not just, but includes behavioral variation. And she's studying monkeys at sites where they don't crack nuts. And she's studying a couple of different species of capuchins, bearded capuchins and buffy-headed capuchins. And, she's got different species in that group. So the project is still kind of going in that way. And the EthoCebus project, the Fazenda Boa Vista site, is one big chunk of it. So she's had several students running their PhDs there. And in Brazil, that means 2 years of field work, and then you write it up. So these are long projects.
Right. And generating a huge amount of data as well.
Yeah. And one of the very interesting ones, we've just published like this much of it, just a little tiny piece of it, by Lucas Peternelli, a Brazilian student who studied the nutrition of the diet that the monkeys were eating. And he did that through all-day follows, tracking exactly what the monkeys were putting in their mouths all day long. And if you don't think that's a big job, because they're busy eating all day long.
All the time, yeah.
So
that's all they do, right?
It was a huge project. But we took one little piece of that that was not his main point, because it's for him to publish his main dissertation. But we took one little piece of that and looked at the nutritional consequences for the monkeys of cracking nuts. What did nut cracking contribute to the diet? And that just came out in Current Biology in January, last January, just came out. And the short answer is that it on the days that the monkeys cracked nuts, it isn't that they got more calories, it's that they managed a better balance among the various nutrients. And we're talking about carbohydrates, lipids, and fibers, and protein. And so this was analyzed. I have to pull the paper out to know what I'm talking about here. I'm about to say things very vaguely. If you think I should pull the paper out, let me know.
I mean, a little detail would be enough. So it's
the ecology of nutrition,
right.
and Jessica Rothman is somebody who works in that area. If you want to look it up.
So it does have basically a nutritional value of crab. It has returns.
It has the value is that the resources permit a more balanced diet across time. So instead of having it sort of takes out the unevenness in diet. It makes for a really good quality diet, which is reflected in behavior in more time spent doing other things besides feeding in this population than in other populations. So it allows free time to do other things. So if you think about now, thinking back to human origins, this is very speculative. We spun a story. So here's the story we were spinning. That if you think back to human origins, when humans were just beginning, or even not even humans, but hominids before humans, were beginning to use percussive tools in feeding, or tools of any sort in feeding. They're doing it occasionally, opportunistically, with natural found objects when the opportunity arose. It's not like you had an industry of creating, shape of stone knapping did not just arise in one day. There had to be simple origins. And the simple origins are working occasionally, opportunistically, with found objects and available resources. And that's what the Capuchin monkeys do. And so if this occasional use of a found object in foraging has a measurable benefit on the nutrient, on the nutrition of the population, it should have something similar if another species did it, like human ancestors, hominins of some sort. So it just sort of sets the stage for attention to other things, which could be cultural things, it could be personal ornamentation, it could be new ways of using objects as tools.
I mean, we still justify more frequent eating out, in those terms. It frees up time. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that was an interesting finding, and we naively were thinking about it in terms of more calories, but that's not it. It's really not about more calories. It's about how everything fits together. So that was an interesting paper. So that just came out, and we published one this year also about how young monkeys become more expert at cracking, and it isn't all about body weight, which we know there is some relation between body weight and cracking, but it isn't really just that they get bigger and then they can do it better. Get big enough and then they practice for years. So that was an interesting work too. It's so interesting that my undergraduate advisor, Professor Meva Singh, so he retired after I started working with him, but he has published more in the last few years after his retirement than he did before his retirement in his career.
Well, he's an ambitious guy.
So he is a lifelong professor, and he still goes to his office, like 6 days a week, and he's still on the same place, morning 8 to 5, and he's still like nothing has changed for him, And
Yeah,
likewise, you have taken retirement, but you are also, publishing out studies and I
right.
mean,
But
it's
I'm not spending 8 to 5 in my office. That's
right.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
I moved house and
yeah,
I packed up my office and I packed up as much of my lab as I could manage.
yeah,
And I moved it to my new house. And I now have a basement full of my articles, not mine, but I
yeah,
had a reprint library. Well, I've transported that portion of the reprint library that is not currently online. So that's still 3 filing cabinets full.
yeah,
So so there's a lot of stuff that I have that's not really available online that I could find.
right.
Um, and boxes of data and boxes of tapes and boxes of digital tape and boxes of VHS tape. And I recycled, I think, 4 barrels of VHS tape.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a major job.
Probably the largest collection of monkey videos in the world, or at least
Yeah,
the largest collection of Capuchin videos. Yeah,
it's, anyway. So, yeah, so
yeah,
I really have changed my working style, and I don't work so much. I do a lot of other things. I'm
yeah,
very busy. I'm very busy, but it's not all about data
right.
and writing. It's about 1/3 about data and writing.
Okay.
Yeah. But
So
it's also true
yeah,
that I'm asked to do a lot of reviewing
yeah,
and article reviewing and grant reviewing and
and
10
editing. Yeah,
fellowship reviewing and all kinds of reviewing. So I do so much of that that I almost have no time to write my own stuff. But
right.
yeah, little by little.
Yeah. So Doree, you had a very enriched and very kind of you're both prolific as well as a very beautiful career you had overall, right, in academia.
Thank you.
And academia has also changed over time. Things have changed, the constraints have changed, the pressures have changed. So how do you see, like, would you, like, if you enter the academia right now, currently, can you imagine having similar kind of a career, or would it be something else, or what would you think differently?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I can answer your question because I haven't been put in the position of trying to find a job lately.
that's
So,
true.
so for the last 30 years. So, whatever I know about it is rather out of date. In fact, I'll ask you, I mean, because I was advising you when you were looking for a job, did I give you appropriate advice? Or was I just kind of, out of
No,
date?
so the best advice you said was an independent position is better than anything else. And the only reason you do a postdoc is because you do not have an independent position, right? When I was under pressure to do a postdoc and multiple postdocs, I was thinking postdoc more from the perspective of you have to do it, and you are of the opinion that you do it because of some reasons and not because you want to do just a postdoc, right?
Right. Not just for the
So
fun of doing it.
yeah, and I kind of agree with that. I think an independent position, uh, independence is the most important factor in your success.
Well, I think it was the
And
most important factor in my success.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't know. So I formed my own lab,
yeah, yeah,
I didn't join a lab that was already going.
yeah,
And I always had a relatively small lab. I mean, it
right,
was basically me
right,
and whatever collaborators I had around me, but I didn't have a big multi-million-dollar lab with
right,
7 or something. I mean, that's not the kind of ship that I ran, so to speak.
yeah,
So I think that's still possible, but to be honest, I don't really know. So having non-human primates has gotten incredibly complicated. There's so many more regulations about
yes,
housing, about care, and about record keeping, and so on. I don't know if I would manage to set up my own primate lab as I did.
yeah,
Uh, but there are small labs around. There aren't so many because the expense has gotten really.
yes, right.
And instead, people are working with some other species. I mean, work with dogs is exploding. And that's
Exporting, yeah,
great because your subjects are kept at home by somebody else. They take care of their veterinary care, they feed them, they care for them, they train them, and then they just willingly bring them to your lab and
right,
they participate in your experiments for free.
Yeah, a
So
lot of neuroscience work is going on in dogs these days.
that's great. That's
Yeah.
new. When I was a grad student, people were not doing cognitive studies or behavioral studies with dogs. And I think that's wonderful.
Right.
So, I mean, you know, they're mammals, they're extremely social. There's a lot of interesting things we can do with dogs.
Yeah.
Also birds, and birds likewise are a little easier to manage in a lab setting from the point of view of regulations, at least.
Yeah.
Than non-human primates. And there's a lot of interesting work with birds, also interesting field
Yeah.
work.
And that's also the reason a lot of labs are moving to marmosets, for instance, now, because they're
Right.
easy to house and easy to maintain compared to
Right.
bigger macaque and capuchin groups.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So, yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure that I would be able to replicate exactly the career that I had. Probably not. Things are never going to be quite the same. But nevertheless, I would still advise people to try to engineer their independence in whatever way is possible for them.
Yes. No,
And
I have experienced this myself. So since I moved to Omaha, right, even the 5 month stint as a research associate was kind of independent. So your productivity and your ability to think expands exponentially compared to when you have a mandate, even though you might not be working for that mandate for like 12 hours a day. But the sense of independence itself is like, it makes you grow.
freeing.
Yeah,
It's liberating.
it's liberating. Yeah.
Yeah. Even though you then face the problem of trying to figure out how you're going to do this wonderful study that you've thought up, because you don't have the tools and you don't know how to analyze the statistics properly, and you discover right away that you need collaborators.
That's true, but also unless you are specializing in certain technical aspect of things, like that's what I have experienced. What I learned in my postdoc was more like certain technical skills, which I'm not using anymore, and some to know the system a little more, like the funding system and how things work and the constraints and the politics of it. It was not as important from the standpoint of thinking about experiments or designing things or or executing things. I think by the end of your PhD, if you are trained well, and I was trained very well by you and Professor Meva Singh, you already know most of those elements, like to what so there are two aspects: to be a scientist and to be a scientist in a setting. So by the end of your PhD, you are already a scientist. I think postdoc helped me a little more to learn to be a scientist in a setting rather than, to be a scientist.
Yeah. And hopefully you also learned, I don't know if you will ever learn, to have regular sleeping and waking cycles.
That's the only thing which I've not learned so far.
I don't know if you will ever learn it.
But I'm learning that there are actually studies going on, and there are some people who are having an argument that actually proper sleep is actually a skill. The ability to sleep, you learn to sleep. Yeah.
I think that could be. I think so. So I wish for you that you practice it.
It's a difficult skill to learn. Some people never learn it.
But back to the idea of what's different now.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to know exactly, because I'm not at that end. You can't.
Yeah.
I'm contextually bound to where I am now. So I can say what the landscape looks like to me.
I think your career was in a very different setup.
Just
so
well, I was willing to take risks, basically.
Yeah. No, as well as the academic system, where PhD students come in as a TA. So for instance, like when I was with you, I had a scholarship in my first year where I did not have to TA. It was a research stipend directly from the graduate school. But the system where students come in and they're paid through a TA-ship. So there's not an immense pressure on the faculty to get funding support for them. And the students are also part of the teaching kind of a setup.
Right.
It has its own advantages. It slows you down a little bit, but at the same time, it has advantages of a very slow moving system, which nourishes students. And there's lack of pressure to publish, and it's more relaxed compared to when you run a lab from the scratch, where everything depends on your soft money. And you're always digging and hunting for money so that you can sustain the group and you can sustain work. It's a very different kind of a mindset.
I think it's too high. I never wanted that kind of lab. That was too high pressure for me.
But things are moving in that direction overall in academia.
So
yeah,
I think in part it's because there are too many of us. I mean,
I agree with you.
we are competing for a limited pie, and the more of us there are, the harder it is. So
Right.
I know that the funding rate at NSF in the Animal Behavior Program, which has a different name now,
Yeah.
but it's abysmally low. It's like lower than 10% as far as I know. And I've been on NSF panels, and there are excellent, excellent, excellent proposals that, I mean, really, at the end, the
Yeah.
ones that get funded are not better than the ones that don't get funded. There's just not enough money to fund all the projects that totally deserve funding. And so
Yeah.
that's a very discouraging situation for young investigators. So people go towards areas where there's better funding opportunities. That's certainly the case in comparative psychology in this country. So,
Yeah.
so in Europe, animal cognition is recognized and well funded. That's true in Austria, it's true in Britain, it's true in
Yeah.
Germany, it's less
Most
true
countries.
in Italy, but it's true in France, and in most European countries, just from the Nordic right down to Greece. We're talking
Right.
all of Europe. In Asia, I'm not sure what's happening in China. That's harder to know.
But I moved from animal behavior, so I'm completely in human neuroscience. So
Yeah,
I think
you
I didn't face
epitomize
such.
what's going on.
Yeah, so I didn't face the challenge, like, but had I stuck to, if I would have moved with comparative psychology, I think the challenges I would have faced for funding and other support would have been very different.
Right. Well, you weren't ever going to go into comparative psychology. You were going to go into
No,
comparative biology and look at
yes,
biomechanics of spiders
right,
and
right,
crickets, and you probably could have made that work. But of course, there's less funding there than there is in what you're doing now,
yes.
because what you're doing now has clinical implications.
Clinical
The
applications,
thing
yeah,
with clinical implications, and the more direct they are, the easier it works,
yeah,
is you have a much broader funding field. So that's what's happening to comparative psychology in this country. It's just sort of becoming biomedicalized, if you will.
yeah.
Clinicalized, those are not words, but it's having a clinical or a biomedical implication somewhere in your theme,
Yeah,
just
is kind of a
fundamental.
must, yes.
Yeah, if you're just doing straight ethology,
And that's why when you see ethological groups, they're also doing a lot of biodiversity, a lot of, for example, biomedical work based on fecal samples or parasitic load, and
right,
a lot of
right.
immunology and infectious
Right.
disease
Actually,
kind of.
the One Health approach has been
Yeah,
really important actually for funding field work, especially in apes,
yeah,
but also monkeys, and probably also in other species that I'm not well versed in to know. But I mean, it's a holistic approach looking at the whole ecosystem, all the components, the vectors, the potential vectors.
yeah,
It's an ecological approach, and that benefits a range of disciplines, not just
right,
a narrow. So that's a good trend,
yeah.
but that doesn't help the small investigator with a small lab.
I think like my generation of investigators is stuck in a transition happening in academia, and the way I see things based on funding constraint is, of course, we have overproduction of PhDs. I think with time we'll realize that researchers can actually be independent researchers, in the sense that you don't need always a pyramid, like a group of 5 postdocs and 10 PhDs. You can have much smaller groups doing innovative stuff and
Mhm.
collaborating across collaborators of the same capability and of the same age,
Right,
rather than always, you need not always be a PI of like 10 students, right?
right.
And I kind of accepted that fact. So right now I don't have student because I couldn't recruit on time, so my student might be coming next year. But I'm
Mhm.
not very eager to, as much as I would like to, at some point, I'm not very eager to just explode the group. If I have collaborators of the same capacity and working on interesting projects, I would carry on working with them, where they all bring their own expertise. Until we
Mhm.
can sustain that kind of atmosphere, it's pretty
You do need,
nourishing.
I would say, I would advise you to have critical mass, though. There's
Yeah.
something exciting about having 2 or 3 colleagues
No,
and
of
not.
course, I agree with you. You need to collect data. You need to start some new ideas or test new ideas. So I'm
Yeah.
already attached to a bigger established group in my department,
Mhm.
and I was lucky to have that. So I can a little, rely on that.
Right.
And there are students I co-mentor, And my students will be co-mentored by that group as well. So we are kind of a
That's
fused
nice.
two labs together, right?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
nice.
But I'm starting to like that system a little more compared to one PI responsible for 10 students. And then you go into certain pressure of just getting funding. When you
Right.
have 2 or 3
But,
PI
I mean,
groups, yeah.
you have you already have the pressure of getting funding. So just get started and get
Yeah.
some funding and
Yeah.
fund 1 or 2 students and just start. Yeah.
Right.
You can also do a lot of work, I imagine, without funding, with the resources you have. You seem to have.
No, so I am funded for 2 years, for 1.5 years, using a huge grant. We have a Cobra grant. And then there are several proposals. Some of them will mature by the next year, and I have a good amount of startup and good startup support for graduate students.
So I mean, you can do a lot.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We can, and we are doing. But I was talking more in terms of the philosophy moving forward, of trying to just make like a pyramid, or having more connectedness and working on more connected projects. Choosing
a network
between the
versus
two.
a pyramid.
A network versus a pyramid, and that network itself will have a smaller pyramid of my own, but that will be much smaller pyramid compared to if I go just full throttle, my pyramid.
Right.
So
right.
it will be connected to other smaller pyramids as opposed to larger pyramids. So that's what.
Yeah. So I suppose that's always been options. So I'm not sure that's different now than it used to be in the last 30, 40, 50 years. I'm not sure that's changed a lot. I think that's always been a sort of personal choice of the scientist researcher, how to run their labs, since academia began in this way. I mean, Charles Darwin was working by himself or with his son.
Right.
Because there were no such things as university laboratories running biology experiments at that time.
Yeah.
Well, now there are, but there are also people doing a lot of. So I mean, so let's take as an example, Susan Healy. I think you probably know her. She works with zebra finches in the lab, but she also does field work on hummingbirds in the summers in British Columbia, and it sounds like an idyllic spot where they spend all day watching hummingbirds. It sounds appealing to me. And she runs a very successful lab group. She also does studies on weaver birds in Africa. So she's got lots of warm and cold places to visit at the right time of year. So there are examples of people running diverse labs with different components, and it makes an interesting, it makes a vibrant.
And also technological changes and the ability to send data so fast and communicate also allows that kind of setup much more than it used to before.
Right.
So we have aids, to make it work.
So let me tell you, Madhur, when I did my postdoc in Venezuela, to phone, there was no such thing as internet, to phone my husband, who was at home with our daughter at that time, who was 1.5 years old, and I was in Venezuela, and she was home with him and her grandmother. I had to make an appointment at the phone office in the nearest city, and I always made it for 5 a.m. because any other time the business lines, I couldn't get through. So I had to do it before business hours, and I would drive to the city and have my appointed telephone time, and I could speak for about 10 minutes, and that was it. So,
but it wasn't very different in Brazil in 2015 as well.
Because
we were in equally remote location at that time.
So I mean, when you realize the ease of communication at the present time for most people, even in most places, even in Senda Boa Vista, there is now cell phone reception, and there's internet now.
Okay.
So I mean, it changed. It went from the 19th century to the 21st century in about 5 years. So it does. It makes many things easier.
Right, and it lets you express your personality, your work, your way, more easily than before.
So I guess that's a good thing. I'm not sure that the science we do is better because of it, but it certainly happens faster.
Yes. Yes, and I mean, for more freedom-loving people, and I consider myself more freedom-loving, and you know that it makes life easier.
Yeah.
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 Great. So thanks, Doree. It was a wonderful conversation. I think we have covered most of what we planned.
I think so. I think we went through your list. Oh, you said you had one point on here, post-retirement life.
Yes.
I'm enjoying it. I don't have to get up at any set hour in the morning.
Yeah.
And I don't have any set thing I have to do. So I have a lot of freedom. I just do what I want. So it's great.
Except that you don't get paid as much, right?
No, I don't get paid, but I do it anyway. I do it
Yeah.
because I love what I'm doing. And if I don't do it. That's okay.
Right. That's very common with us researchers in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. So, well, thanks, Madhur. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Doree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so on the next time we talk, I hope that you have your phone and you give me a tour of your lab. I would love to see your lab.
Oh, I will. In fact, I'll see. So I'm this year I'm in charge of the seminar series. So basically, I have, along with consultation of the faculties, 8 national speakers coming here. We host them for 2 days, give them the tour of the facility, have them interact with the students, and establish future collaborations. And then local people. There's one every week. So I'll see if there's some event where I can actually have you over here. At some
that would
point,
be
also
nice.
in person.
Although it would be on slightly false colors because there's no way I'm going to collaborate.
Yeah, but there is a possibility in some ways, we can make it work.
Okay.
For some other reason. So
anyway,
I'll
you can
see.
also just give me a tour with the phone.
I will, and you would love. It would be an understatement if I say that we have the best facility for biomechanics.
I know you've said that, so that's part of the reason I want to visit it.
Yeah.
What you've got.
We have almost any kind of toy to study human movement and physiology one can imagine.
So study people using chopsticks, would you please?
So we are not studying anything that precise right now because most of the work is focused on whole body and gait kind of ideas. Right. So, but we have a lab especially dedicated for movement dexterity. So, we have more precise cameras for a much smaller space. We have much smaller markers which can track, and we also have a markerless motion tracking system, which we can record at a more precision and much more finer movements. Nobody is using it right now for studying finger movements, but we have resources for that, along with
that'd be wonderful.
The EMG sensors and
maybe you'll have a student who would like to do that.
Yeah, so there's a smaller lab for that, for studying manual dexterity. But so far, most of the students currently are engaged in full body analysis and more like gait and postural control. And questions of that sort.
Reasons to do that.
But it's just a matter of time. But we do have the resources.
Great.
So yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Madhur.
So thanks, Doree. Have a great day ahead.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.